Alright guys, welcome to my build guide for my open world Chrono Boon support spam build. This build is pretty straightforward, pretty obvious to most people who would play Chrono or are interested in playing Chrono. But just because something's obvious doesn't mean it isn't worth doing. So anyway guys, with that said, enjoy this build. Again, just please note that Chrono is not my forte, and there's a lot of nuances that I am no doubt missing, and I don't want you guys to necessarily hold that against me. I did consult with a lot of Chrono players to make sure this was decent, and hopefully it gives you the information that you need to take up playing Chrono in the open world and giving me the boons that I need to do what I like to do best. So sit back, enjoy. All right, guys, Chrono. All right, the gear that we are going to run on Chrono is going to be mostly Diviners with Rune of the Pack. I recommend, as far as trinkets go, full Diviners everything. On armor, it is almost full Diviners with Rune of the Pack. The one piece of Berserker gear I recommend is the gloves, because we do hit boon duration cap without these gloves, so they can afford to go Berserker. If you do plan on running Chrono in Fractals, I would recommend going to the Discretize website and seeing what their currently min-maxed build looks like. I know they're running mostly Diviners, but I know they might have a bit more pieces of Berserker gear mixed in, because they tend to have the Fractal pots into their consideration, which gives you extra boon duration. So if you do plan on running this in Fractals, I would suggest gearing it based on Fractals and not open world. But if all you plan on doing is showing up at open world events, do this. Full Diviners except for gloves, which can be Berserker. Or alternatively, the gloves can be Assassins. I believe the math works out that Assassin's gloves are like some infinitesimally better amount. I already had Berserker's gloves, and I didn't have Assassin's gloves. So for 0.001% DPS gain, I'm just going to stick with the Berserker. For weapons, sword, focus, sword, shield. Your offhand focus does not have to be a focus. It can be a sword if you want higher DPS. For me personally, I don't care about the DPS as much as I care about the utility, and I find the utility of the offhand focus to be really good. So in my situation, I'm going to recommend focus. However, I would not fault you whatsoever for running offhand sword, and there's definitely going to be situations where you know without a doubt you're not going to need the focus utility, and you should probably just run offhand sword anyway. And in Fractals, you probably want both. So, but I would say if you are just an open world person running around, to probably go with focus, which is why I have it and which is why I recommend it. So our main hand sword, Diviners, of course, with Sigil of Concentration. Our offhands are going to be Diviners with Sigil of Force. The last thing for gear, again, I said before, all trinkets with Diviners. Diviners gear, I said it in my rev video, somewhat hard to get. The trinkets are easy to get. The gear is a bit of the weapons and armor is a bit of a grind. I think if you do the Thunderhead Keep meta and then you put together the puzzle piece every day, you're gonna get minimally 3 Serpentine jewels or whatever they're called. I don't know what they're called, but you can finish your set in like 10 days. So 10 days is a bit of a grind, but it's not a huge amount of investment, especially since you're gonna get a really nice gear out of it at the end. And if you have any ascended boxes already healers boxes laying around in your bank that you haven't got a use for, Diviner's gear is in the healer boxes that drop. So that's a useful way to get some easy pieces of Diviner's gear and speed up your grind. So that's it for the gear. Let's talk traits. So traits for the open world Chrono. I am going to recommend Dueling, Inspiration, and Chronomancer. Dueling is a pure DPS line. And some people have suggested that maybe Illusions is better there, but after talking to several Chrono mains, The gist that I got was that the DPS you gain from dueling is pretty huge, and the extra utility that you get from illusions is pretty minimal. Plus, the illusions rotation, like the cooldowns and stuff, line up weird. And most people, especially since I'm recommending this guide for sort of semi-casual open-world play, illusions is not necessary, and the DPS gain from dueling is the way to go. So that's the thought process behind that. In dueling, we select Phantasmal Fury, obvious DPS gain, Fencer's Finesse, another obvious DPS gain, and then Superiority Complex, again, an obvious DPS gain. That's what the straight line's for, that's why it's here, and it makes this build, even with Diviner's Gear, or especially with Diviner's Gear, do respectable DPS. Inspiration, at the Adept and Major tiers, you can kind of run whatever trait is going to be most useful to the fights that you're in. For example, at the Adept level, I'm taking Sympathetic Visage, which is Phantasms suck Condis off of me when they're first summoned. That's not going to be applicable in every place, but it's a nice little utility. Restorative Mantras, I'm not using Mantras, so that's not going to come into play for me. And Medic's Feedback, I don't res noobs. If you're a noob, I'm sorry to offend you by saying that, but I don't res noobs. So Medic's Feedback, rarely going to be useful for me. However, some of you out there do res noobs, and if that is you, Medic's Feedback is a decent option. At the major tier, I recommend Warden's Feedback because I'm using offhand focus. It makes sense to lower the cooldown of my Phantasmal Warden. If you are not using offhand focus and you're choosing to use offhand sword for that extra fat DPS, you might want to use something else. Interestingly, losing conditions and healing yourself when you shatter, and we shatter a lot in this build, that has some attractiveness to it. And Phantasm spawning with Aegis might sound weird or weak, but there's a lot of events where that's actually good. Shaq Garrett comes to mind. Shaq Garrett does a lot of knockbacks and blowouts. So there are times where your Phantasms will spawn and not get their hit in because he knocks them back immediately. And your Phantasm not getting their hit in is just a major feels bad. So for Tangled Depths meta, I will often recommend Protected Phantasms. But at the Grandmaster tier, this is why we're here. This is why the build works and why we would take inspiration in the first place. And it's Blurred Inscriptions, which makes our Signet of Inspiration affect 10 players. 10 players, you know how good that is in raids. Well, guess what? It's really damn good in open world too, because now we can put tons of boons out on 10 players, and that is the way to go. The Signet of Inspiration, which we'll talk about when we go over skills, extends the boons that people already have on them. So our goal is to apply boons to as many people as we can, and then extend them with Signet of Inspiration. And Signet of Inspiration helps quite a bit. Chronomancer, relatively straightforward which traits we take. We're going to go with Time Catches Up to make our Mind Rack deal 10% more damage. We are going to be using Mind Rack basically on cooldown. So you're definitely going to want Time Catches Up. Improved Alacrity, a no-brainer. We get to use our skills more often because we're going to have much better Alacrity. So that helps not only us with DPS, but it helps us with boons. It's just good. So we go with Improved Alacrity. And then at Grandmaster, we take Chrono Phantasma, which makes all of our Phantasms hit twice. That is really, really super good in combination with the first skill on our utility bar, which is Signet of Ether, which when you activate it, it reduces the recharge of your Phantasms by 100%, so they auto-recharge. So essentially what you do is you cast your Phantasm, you use Signet of Ether, cast your Phantasm again, and then with Chrono Phantasma, you get 2 more hits in with each Phantasm. So essentially you're getting 4 Phantasm hits in every go-round, which is pretty good. Now comes the controversial part, the utility skills. Signet of Inspiration, not controversial. Again, it spreads boons to 10 players in this build. It's great. It's wonderful. Everyone loves it. Fantastic. No debate. The controversial part comes in that I am recommending double wells. Some people would say, oh, if you want to be effective at open world meta events, you need to have Mimic so that you can go Mimic, SOI, SOI again, and get lots of extra SOIs because you have to do boons on tons and tons of people. That may indeed be the case where you want to run Mimic SOI. However, this guide is aimed at a slightly less min-maxy, less hardcore audience than like a raid guide where Mimic SOI is probably the way to go. And what I am going to tell you is that it's way easier to play with double wells than it is with Well of Action and Mimic SOI. There is a very good chance that you will struggle with Mimic SOI as a sole chrono in keeping up perma alacrity with improved alacrity without doing that, especially if you flub your rotation every now and then, which most of us do. So with that said, I recommend double wells. I've talked to several chronomains, and they say if you just want to be easy and not have to think so much and just enjoy playing, double wells is also the way to go. So that is that. If you are a chronomain and you think differently, feel free to speak up in the comments. But I would say for the general audience, the people that watch this video and haven't ever played chrono before and are just dipping their toes in it and trying it out with this build, double well, way to go. And of course, I should explain, Well of Recall gives a ton of alacrity out to 5 players, and Well of Action gives a ton of quickness out to 5 players. And of course, that will all get extended when we use SOI. And then our elite skill is Time Warp, which will put tons of quickness out on 10 players. And the fact that it's out on 10 players means when we use SOI, it extends it out on 10 players. So we are very, very good at keeping quickness up on 10 players as a result of that. So with that said, I want to talk about the rotation a little bit. And again, I am far from a chrono main, so I'm not going to be able to tell you all the little minute tricks and how you should change your rotation slightly with every boss. I'm just going to give you a general, easy, fire and forget open world guide, and I'm going to show you an example of the rotation that I sort of recommend next, but I'm going to explain it pretty simply, and then I'll go over it in slow-mo. So you always want to, in my opinion, start the fight off with a shield phantasm. You want to start on shield, obviously. Start the fight off with a shield phantasm, first thing you do, so that it's doing its thing while you are doing your thing. And then Illusionary Leap is your clone generator. You're going to have 1 clone up, and it'll be time to go into Continuum Split. But before you go into Continuum Split, you want to cast Time Warp. This is the trickiest part of the rotation. You want to activate your Continuum Split halfway through the cast of Time Warp. So you start casting Time Warp, and during the cast, you go into Continuum Split. And you might say, well, why would you do it like that? The reason is, Time Warp has a relatively long wind up and after cast, even though it says it casts quickly. What you can do is it will count as casting within Continuum Split for the purposes of resetting its cooldown. And since we're only doing a 1 clone Continuum Split, we're not going to have the greatest amount of time to get things done. So cast Time Warp in the middle of the cast, go to Continuum Shift. Then you're going to want to do Tides of Time to get that alacrity going, and then Signet of Inspiration. And that will probably be all that most players that aren't experienced chronos, such as myself, are going to be able to get into that short Continuum Split in that amount of time. So again, cast Time Warp. Halfway through the cast, go into Continuum Split, use Tides of Time, and then Signet of Inspiration, and then your Continuum Split is going to end. And then what you're going to want to do is cast both of your wells, cast Tides of Time again, and then Signet of Inspiration again. And now everything will be off cooldown, or everything will be on cooldown, except for your Time Warp, which you only use in CS. And you will swap to Focus or Sword, use your Phantasm, use your heal skill, use your Phantasm again. So that is basically like the little opener that I recommend, and again, I will show you an example of it. So from that point on, we can move on to what you do as things go down. You want to cast Illusionary Leap on cooldown to keep your clone count up. You want to use Blurred Frenzy on cooldown because it's your highest DPS skill. And you want to use Mind Rack on cooldown. Mind Rack is good damage, and it gives you Alacrity every time you use it. Now, getting to get the bonus Alacrity will help, because otherwise it's very hard with improved Alacrity to keep 100% uptime on yourself. So you have to be doing that. So you have to remember Sword 3, Sword 2, and Mind Rack have to be used on cooldown. Additionally, I would recommend using your Wells and Signet of Inspiration on cooldown. It should line up so that when you are getting ready to CS again, when your CS is coming off cooldown, that your Signet of Inspiration will either be just about to come off cooldown or just off cooldown. In that case, you want to save it for your Continuum Split. Save anything you can for your Continuum Split. But I wouldn't be too concerned about getting your Wells into the Continuum Split. If they're on cooldown, don't delay your Continuum Split for long. The most important thing to get off in the Continuum Split is a Time Warp, a Signet of Inspiration, and the Tides of Time. So if you can get the Time Warp, Signet of Inspiration, and Tides of Time off during the Continuum Split, that's fine. If you can't get your Wells because they're still on cooldown, don't worry about it. The Wells don't need to be done in there. If you can get them done in there, hey, it's a free roll, so do it. Okay, so that's a lot to take in. I'm going to show you a quick clip of the opener, and then the rest of it isn't as hard as it sounds. It's basically just, again, using your utility skills on cooldown, using your Tides of Time on cooldown, using Sword 3 and 2 on cooldown, and using Mind Rack on cooldown. It's pretty straightforward. When the skills light up, you use them. And then when you see Continuum Shift is coming off cooldown, you just want to make sure you have your Tides of Time ready and your Signet of Inspiration ready for that. So yeah, it sounds complicated. It's not very complicated. And I think with a little bit of practice, you'll be able to get it at least halfway decent. So before I get into that, I want to show you food. Food can be really anything. I recommend truffle steaks or steaks with winterberry sauce because they're cheaper. You can use the plus 100 precision 70 ferocity food if you like, but I think that these winterberry steaks come out a little bit better. And you can use fruitcakes or sharpening stones, whichever one's cheaper at the time. Since we are just finished with Winter's Day, the fruitcakes are a little bit cheaper, but I know as the year goes on, the sharpening stones become a little bit cheaper than the fruitcake. So your mileage may vary on that, but it's just a little bit extra power. Additionally, I have been told that the Furious sharpening stones are also useful and are a decent DPS gain for this build. So just use your best in slot DPS foods. You don't need to worry about boon duration from your food with this build, so feel free to use foods, not use foods, whatever suits your style. So anyway, with that said, let's talk about the rotation in depth. Alright, so we're gonna engage with our shield Phantasm, and then we're going to use Illusionary Leap to spawn a clone. Then the next thing we're going to do is start casting Time Warp, and during the cast of Time Warp, we go into Continuum Split, Tides of Time, SOI, and you'll see that Continuum Split will end shortly thereafter. Continuum Split is over, so then the next thing we're going to do is Tides of Time again, drop our wells. And then SOI again. So then we'll do sword 3, sword 2, swap to our DPS Phantasm, cast the DPS Phantasm, Signet of Ether, cast the DPS Phantasm again, and then Mind Rack. So from then on, it's really just a matter of using your skills on cooldown as they light up to get the most out of it. Again, most fights aren't going to be very long, so you might not get another use of Continuum Split out. For example, like Octovine, one burn phase, your Continuum Split's still going to be on cooldown, so you don't even have to worry about doing that stuff again going into Continuum Split. You can just literally use the rest of your skills as they come off cooldown. But anyway, not as nasty as it looks. You just got to practice that opener. I mean, I didn't do it nearly very smoothly or efficiently. With a few days of practice or a few weeks of practice, you'll be able to nail that the opening keystrokes really well and be able to fit even more into that tiny little Continuum Split at the beginning. And there's all sorts of other little tricks, like using your blurred frenzy in the Continuum Split to do some aftercast tricks. But all that said, practice makes perfect. So get out there, guys. Learn this chrono. Give me boons while I'm in the open world. I demand it. All right, guys, that is it. Thank you for watching this chrono guide. It was sort of interesting for me to make because I haven't really played chrono since right after Heart of Thorns. I mean, I played it for a little bit in Fractals after Heart of Thorns came out, but I never really played it in raids, and I had to get back into it for this video. It was a learning experience for me, but I hope what I've learned will help you guys out, and I hope you will appreciate how much fun it can be to play this build and know that you're responsible for so much of the DPS of your Zerg since you are the buff king. But anyway, guys, again, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and hit up the comments below if you have any thoughts. Thank you.